Thank you, Guy, and good morning, everybody. I'd just like to take the opportunity to express our sincerest gratitude and appreciation in New Zealand for being part of such an important group. I can't really state how important it is when we're looking at the future of what we love, and as Guy mentioned, how you show up. So we'll talk more about that later, I know, but I really just feel like I wanted to express from down under that we really feel a big part of this, and it's very family oriented, and that's what that's all about. So our college in New Zealand, we express these same values, and we're very, very fortunate to have a small but very vibrant program that we think has a great balance of philosophy, science, and art. And when we started this college, we felt it was very, very important to do what we felt hadn't been done really quite right before, and that's not to cast aspersions on anyone who'd tried it before, but we purposely designed in our startup a significant research initiative, at least plans for it. And we were very, very fortunate to have in one of our first classes to graduate from the college a very, very talented, brilliant individual who kicked on after graduation, got a PhD, and is now setting the chiropractic world alight with some groundbreaking research that really finally does reflect what chiropractic is all about. And I know you all know her well, so please welcome to the stage Dr. Heidi Haavik.
No time to rest. Just do your best. What you hear is not a test. We're only here to make you. We're only here to make you. We're only here to make you.
It's a real pleasure to be here. There's two real reasons that I'm so delighted to be here. I really think our future is in collaboration, in a coalition, in numbers, in banding together and doing this as a united team. The other reason I'm really, really happy to be here is I really like to party. Someone told me this morning that I didn't need to worry too much about what I had to say here today because I am a little bit nervous. And she was telling me that you don't need to worry about it, Heidi. All you need to say is fuck a couple of times and then everything else will be fine. Now that's not fucking good enough, okay, Chrissy? What I really hope you can do is ignore the F-bombs. That's just my nerves speaking. And please listen to the message in between those F-bombs. I'll try to keep them to a minimum as well. I'm hoping you're here today too, partly because you are interested in the science of chiropractic, that you are interested in knowing what it is that the scientific research is telling us about chiropractic. And what I'm going to try and share with you today is the science, the latest science about how chiropractic care works, how we now know it works. So I am a chiropractor. I graduated from the New Zealand College and I do have a PhD in neurophysiology or brain science. So I do partially know what I'm talking about, even though I swear a lot. One thing we do know is that chiropractors are a primary healthcare profession that are very interested in or specialize in the function of the spine and its influence on the central nervous system. And because of that focus on the central nervous system, we know that a lot of people actually think that chiropractic is really all about back pain and neck pain and headaches. And a lot of them are probably congregated up the road at this other hotel at the moment, discussing the research about that. But the sad thing is they're not really looking at the research about the effect of chiropractic on back pain, neck pain, and headaches. They're actually looking at research that looks at low back manipulation on low back pain, or neck manipulation on neck pain, or God knows what kind of manipulation on headaches. And what we've been looking at for the last 15 years is what are the effects of adjusting subluxations, wherever they may be, on central neural function, on brain function. So in reality, what the research is showing us is that chiropractic is so much more than just treating pain. To understand this a little bit better, it's a really good idea just to have a little think about what the role of the spine really is. And there's really three main functions. If you break it down into its absolute basics, there's three main functions that we want from the spine. In some circumstances, we want it to move. We want that flexibility, the movement of the individual vertebra. It dissipates the forces, for example, when you're running, so that you don't injure yourself. But in other circumstances, we actually want it to stiffen up to protect us so that we don't damage ourselves when we're, for example, lifting weights. And it's the paraspinal muscles, the little muscles around the spine that actually allow our spine to either move or stiffen up. And this physiology, the way that the brain can control that flexibility or that movement, is actually really, really complicated. And neuroscientists, not even chiropractic neuroscientists, still don't fully understand how the brain can decide in certain circumstances to move and other circumstances to not. So let alone understanding how we control normal spinal movement, we sure as hell don't know how, we don't understand how dysfunctional spinal movement impacts physiology. And there's a third thing that we really want from our spine, not just to be able to be flexible in certain circumstances and to stiffen up in certain circumstances. We also want the spine to be able to reflexively respond to situations so that we can actually maintain balance and prevent falls. We do this through central neural mechanisms that reflexively switch on. It's beyond your normal conscious control. These little muscles will switch on when you're certain loading and unloading to naturally maintain that balance. It's something that you don't naturally control. But if your spine isn't doing this, if it's not moving when it should, or stiffening up when it should, or reflexively responding as it should, we now have an awful lot of research that's building up showing us that that actually impacts how our brain can control the rest of our body. So we know that through everyday life, our awkward postures or strange movements sustained over time, that this can cause problems with the way that the spine actually moves. That it might not stiffen up when we want it to, that it might not be flexible when it should be, or it might not reflexively respond to loading and unloading. We know that this happens, and we know that that can then impact the way the brain actually perceives what's going on in our bodies. So what we're realizing through this research is really quite fascinating, that that spinal function actually impacts brain function. So if your spine is working well, it actually helps your brain work better. And if your spine is not working well, it actually impacts how accurately your brain perceives what's going on in your body and the environment around it. Now, chiropractors have spent 120 years perfecting the art of being able to find these areas in the spine that aren't doing what they're supposed to do. It's what we call vertebral subluxations. Why we argue about that name, I have absolutely no idea. And I've been to conferences where I kind of have to ask first if I'm allowed to use the S word, which is kind of funny coming from me, yes? One thing we do know when we look at the neuroscience literature is that the brain is always changing. So the brain is constantly changing and adapting based on a whole lot of sensory information that it's receiving on an ongoing basis. And we know that this change within the brain, within the central nervous system, it's usually a good thing. It's how we adapt and manage to learn how to play the piano or ride the bike. But it can also be a bad thing. We know that in the literature. It's not necessarily considered a bad thing, it's just an adaptation, but it's an adaptation that you might not like. For example, we know that if you end up in pain, any kind of pain syndromes, we know that that is a maladaptive plastic thing. So basically we know that your brain can learn to dysfunction just like it can learn to ride a bike or play the piano. So your brain can learn to be in a state of constant pain. And it's not necessarily that one is good or bad, they're both just brain changes, but if it's an adaptation that we don't like, we call it maladaptive plasticity. So the changes that we get, these neural adaptation changes, they're because the brain is constantly receiving a supply of sensory information from our senses. So from our eyes, our ears, our nose, smell, skin, we are constantly bombarded with different sensory messages. And what our brain does is it converts all of those sensory informations into an inner body schema. So it's basically the brain's own map of the body. It has its own internal matrix, and this is how it actually perceives the world. It doesn't just see what the eyes tell it, and it doesn't just hear what the ears tell it. It actually interprets all of that. It also takes into account your past experiences and your expectations for the future. There's basically a hell of a lot of background processing that goes on, and based on all of that, your brain will create for you your own personal reality. And that reality may not actually be 100% accurate. So I'm going to give you an example. If you consider these squares, square A and square B, most of us will see that square A is actually darker than square B. But if we cover up the surrounding information, you can actually see that those two squares are identical in color. And it's pretty incredible. So your eyes don't actually tell you exactly what it's seeing. It's interpreting it for you. And in this situation, it sees the square A is darker than square B because B is in the shadow of the green cylinder. So before you're even aware of it, it is interpreted for you that that square in the shadow, supposedly, that is emitting the exact same frequency of light as the square outside the shadow, because it's in that shadow, it must be a lighter shade of grey. So it has already changed your reality based on its past experiences. It is interpreting what it's seeing and therefore creating your own inner reality. I'll give you another example. If you look at these swirls and you look at the green and the blue colors in between the pink, the green and the blue are actually the same color. But the way our brain works is that it doesn't see colors on its own. It sees colors in contrast to the color it's next to. So in this image, what it's really looking at is it's seeing that the green is in between the yellow or the orange lines, and it's seeing the blue in between the purple lines. And because of that, it's telling you that the two colors that are actually in fact identical are two completely different colors. So if I just blow that picture up in case you don't believe me, which you can't quite see, and then we take away the surrounding purple and orange lines, you can actually see that the color in between these lines are the same. But when they are next to a different color, your eyes will interpret, your brain will interpret what the eyes are telling it. And you will actually see a different color than in reality is there. Pretty cool, eh? Give you another example. The brain doesn't just take into account shadows and light sources and colors, it will also look at surrounding shapes. So in this example, those two orange dots are actually the exact same size. But if it's surrounded by large blue dots, it makes it look smaller. And if it's surrounded by small blue dots, it makes it look larger. So if I remove the surrounding dots, they're exactly the same. And these are the kinds of tricks that the brain is always playing on you. It's just examples to try and show you that what you see isn't necessarily 100% based on reality. What you hear isn't necessarily 100% based on reality. I could give you examples of how what you hear also can be illusions or an interpretation of what you hear. And the same thing, and this is when it gets really interesting, is the way that we feel where our body is in space. So the way our brain interprets that depends on our muscles. But how would you know if your map of reality wasn't accurate? How would you know if your map wasn't accurate or your map was based on faulty perceptions? There are some little clues that are very easy giveaways. If your brain is actually not accurately aware of where your foot is, you'd be stubbing your toe. If your brain isn't accurately aware of where your elbow is, you might knock it in door frames. If your brain isn't accurately aware of where your head is, you might knock it on the car door when you're getting into a car. They would be giveaways that you haven't quite got an accurate map. You can often see little children who have got trouble with their inner body map because they're tripping over their own toes and their own feet all the time. There's something really wrong with their inner body map. Eye-hand coordination, if it's off, if your golf swing is not quite what it should be, if your concentration isn't quite the way it is supposed to be, or if you're overreacting emotionally to a situation, which I do on a regular basis, which is why I get regularly chiropractic care. But what the science is showing us is the way your spine is functioning impacts how the brain perceives what's going on in the world. So what we're interpreting a lot of this to mean is that the way the spine is functioning impacts your own inner brain matrix, your own inner body schema within your mind, within your brain. And we know that you can develop problems if your spine isn't functioning properly. You can end up developing problems just as easily or as difficult as it is to learn how to play the piano or ride a bike. It takes time. This is something that develops over time. If your inner body map isn't accurate, over time you're going to end up with problems. If your brain doesn't quite know what's going on in the spine, it's not going to be able to move your arms and legs in an appropriate way, and you will end up developing signs and symptoms based on that. This is where chiropractic can come into it. Because with chiropractic care, by checking and adjusting the subluxations, not just manipulating where it hurts, by improving that spinal function, we know that that improves the accuracy with which your brain can see what's going on in your body and in the environment around it. We know that these scientific studies are showing over and over and over again that if we adjust the spine where you're subluxated, you have an improvement in the accuracy with which your brain perceives what's going on. And we know that over time, this is going to be improving conditions and symptoms and problems through this mechanism, through a positive neuroplastic effect. And one of the really important ways to explain this is that your brain isn't just creating that map, like I was saying, from your ears, eyes, and nose, but it also does it from muscles. So every single time you stretch a muscle, your brain is notified that that muscle is stretched, and that's how your brain can see where your arms and legs are in space. But there are some very important little muscles very close to your spine and skull, the little paraspinal muscles. When these little guys move and stretch, they are the ones that tell the brain what the spine is doing, and that represents the core of your body. Everything else you need to do will always be referenced to the core of your body. And we think that's why these little paraspinal muscles, that their function is so important. It's like the eyes of your brain about what's going on in your spine. And every other movement that you need to do is going to be in relation to where the core of your body is. So if it doesn't know accurately where your core is, it's not going to be very accurately controlling your arms and legs. And this we have shown in multiple studies now, that when we adjust the spine, we improve the brain's ability to accurately move arms and legs. Pretty cool. And I'll give you an example of how this acts as a subluxation. Imagine if you lived in a house all your life. You've been in this house since you were born, and in this house is this long corridor with no windows. And at the end of this corridor is an electrical fuse box. And then imagine that the fuse box is blown and you're pitched into complete darkness. Would you be completely helpless? Or can you walk down that corridor and turn the lights back on? Mike is nodding and Chris is nodding. That is good news. You can, of course you can. You've lived there all your life. You know roughly how long it is, how wide it is. You'd be able to get down there and turn the lights back on. And your brain is just as smart as that. It can also function even if there's parts of the body it cannot see. It can do so because of its past experience. The only problem is, what if before the lights went out, your kids had left a bicycle in that corridor that you hadn't seen? Yes, Chrissy, that's when you can fall and have an accident. And it's the same thing if we're subluxated. If we're subluxated, it's like there is a part of the body or the environment that the brain cannot accurately see. And you will function pretty well because your brain has been with you all your life. It will know roughly what to do. It will know roughly how to control your spine, your arms and legs, and whatever it is that you're trying to do. But if there are parts that it cannot accurately see, then if there are bicycles in your path, you will have accidents. Make sense? And it is that simple. And this is where chiropractic comes into it. So a chiropractor, a real chiropractor, they are trained, they are the experts at finding those areas of the spine that aren't moving properly and gently adjusting them. And we can adapt our techniques whether they're newborn babies or they are older adults at 98. You know, there are many, many different techniques and safe ways that we can detect subluxations and correct subluxations. And each time we are doing that, what we're really doing is improving the accuracy and communication between our brain, our body, and the environment. Another thing to keep in mind is that a lot of people come and see chiropractors because of a symptom, at least to begin with. And for some people, that's the only reason that they're there. But it's quite important that they also realize that symptoms don't just come out of thin air. Symptoms take time to build up. And even within neurophysiology, we're discovering more and more that there are ways that the central nervous system will actually adapt and in a way break down, like little straws on a camel's back. And it's not until that 1,000th straw is placed on the camel's back that the camel's back breaks and we have symptoms. And if you can easily explain these things to patients, it's a bit like how our spine is meant to reflexively respond. We know from the literature that a lot of people actually walk around and they can't reflexively respond to things like lifting an arm up or loading and unloading the spine. And we also know from research literature that if you can't do that, if your spine can't reflexively respond, it predicts you going on to having low back injuries. And this is in totally asymptomatic people. It's like the little straws building up on the camel's back before the camel's back breaks and you have symptoms. And if you're aware of these and you can talk about these, it makes it much easier for patients to understand why by the time they've come to see you with symptoms, we're actually talking about 1,000 straws that we actually need to correct. Another thing to keep in mind is that symptoms may appear at a place quite distant to the spine. And people might find it very difficult to understand why they could, for example, have knee pain and that would have anything to do with their spine. But we know that if the spine isn't moving properly, it's not communicating with the brain properly. And if the brain is not aware of where the core is, it is going to start guessing. There's going to be parts of the body that it cannot see. For example, the knee. And in that case, it's going to be making it up. Your knee has been with you all your life. All the muscles around the knee, it will be sending messages based on past experiences. But they may not be 100% accurate. And we know again from the literature that poor motor control or recruiting the wrong order of muscles over time can lead to ongoing problems and pain. And therefore, checking and adjusting the spine, correcting that accurate communication between your brain and the core of the body means that the brain can more accurately see what's going on around that knee. It can recruit the right muscles in the right order at the right time, and over time, that knee pain is going to go away. Make sense? And again, it is that simple. So basically, at the end of the day, the message that I'd like to convey with this research over 16 years now is that with proper spinal function, your brain is more accurately aware of what is going on in your body and the environment around you. And when it's able to do that over time, then your whole body is going to be functioning better. Every aspect of your body is going to be functioning better. And this optimal function means less accidents, better function, and an optimal, ideal quality of life. That is the actual reason that chiropractors go to work every day, and that maintaining that accurate communication within your system is the reason that chiropractors get up in the morning. Wouldn't you agree, Chrissy? I didn't take the piss out of you too much today, did I? Thank you very much for your time. Minutes early. And I thought I really spoke quietly and calmly and slowly. So I've got 3 minutes worth of questions if there are any. Yes?
David Koch, I think Buffy right now. I love this overview, but the one question I always want to challenge the researcher to consider is this part of or the mechanism that you think is driving the issue of subluxation?
Definitely part of. Definitely part of. What I'm sharing with you today is based on the science I have available to me today, and that is not a lot. And I love the debates and the arguments. Actually, one thing I'd quite like to share on that note too is that people ask me whether my science is vitalistic. And I say, well, no, the science really only is science. Science is just science. It just is what it is. It's a method to explore what the truth of something is. But what makes it vitalistic, if at all, is the questions that I ask. So I don't run a study where chiropractic care is manipulating the elbow. We don't actually ever ask chiropractors, we don't try and ever tell them how to suck eggs. We ask chiropractors to give their chiropractic care whatever way they do it. And I think that's really, really important because we don't yet understand fully what it is that takes place in a chiropractic interaction. We don't know how much intent matters. We don't know how much our own heart and our caring makes a difference. We don't know if it's adjusting a subluxation that is the be-all and end-all. We don't even know fully what a subluxation is yet. So the only thing that really makes the research that we do vitalistic is the question we ask is, the question comes through a vitalistic lens. I believe in the whole vitalistic principles. It's the way I was trained. I see a genius in every single person that comes in front of me. Even the way we try and run our research center, we try and run it from a vitalistic perspective, that every single person that's part of the team has genius to offer, and it's my job as the director to try and unlock that and unleash that genius within, and together as a whole we will achieve so much more than any individual part. Does that help? I have one more. Is it David again, or should we share it around? Question over here.
I was slightly perturbed to read the Wikipedia entry for chiropractic described chiropractic as a pseudoscience. How would you respond to that?
Can I answer that one? I actually, it was really quite funny. My PhD supervisor, she's a really good friend of mine still, and there was this paper that she had written up with her students, but I happened to be a co-author, and she was coming to some conference in Australia, and she literally got phoned up by some of these quackbusters, and she was warned about interacting with me and told about this paper that she had written with her students, and how she mustn't have anything to do with me because I was a pseudoscientist. So how Bertie managed to answer that question, I'm not quite sure. We had a good laugh about it. But after that, I actually had to Google what a pseudoscientist was, because to be honest, I really didn't know. Turns out a pseudoscientist is someone who doesn't share their work, who doesn't go through peer review. So I'll give you an example. If I created my own journal, basically I could write whatever the fuck I wanted to, yes? Right? Because if it was my own journal, then I would be a pseudoscientist. But because I collaborate with other neurophysiologists, they do often now the data collection, the data analysis. We sit and have debates and discussions as scientists, biomechanists, bioengineers afterwards. What does this mean? Of course, there's different ways you can interpret it. Mine is vitalistic, theirs is often mechanistic. But all of that, and then publishing in peer-reviewed journals with an impact factor, you get loads and loads of hoops you've got to jump through. They make sure it's all correct, it's more accurate. That, by its very definition, means it's not pseudoscientific. So. Shall I exit the stage? I'm open for questions anytime.